Okay, and finally we have Bill Bickle, who is going to give us a sanity check from the community banking perspective.
I've been accused of many things, but never a sanity check. Usually I'm leading the insanity. But first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to address this conference, and certainly to the presenters and the papers that they present, which certainly create topics worth thought and consideration. As a community banker, as a person with a degree in economics, but who frankly spent more time supporting Montana State University's aspirations to be the #1 party school in the Northwest versus academics, my approach will be a little bit different. And I approach this from the standpoint of 40 years of experience in the banking industry, except for 5 years as a regulator, as a community banker for all of my career. Many of us in this room have experienced firsthand the changes and the evolution in the industry as it's affected branches. The rise of branches and truly national banks, as identified in the papers. The predicted demise of branches in the community banking model, which has never come true, no matter how often predicted. The development of electronic banking, which was supposed to lift from us the burden of managing physical locations, and instead, from my perspective as a community banker, it simply multiplied the complexity of now running multiple delivery channels in a environment, including the branch, and coordinating all the different delivery channels. And finally, the unanticipated impact of electronic banking on the stability of our deposit base. Not all that long ago, we rediscovered that maintaining customer confidence in our institution remains the most important goal. That was true in 1905 when my great-grandfather opened his first bank in rural Montana. That was true in the 1980s when Continental Illinois Bank of Chicago failed. One of the big reasons behind its failure was the unitary banking laws, in other words, no branches, within the state of Illinois at that time. So as we look at this, let me start with basically some bright pictures. And what I want to touch on here is really the composition of the U.S. banking market. And we all have our own definitions of where community banking ends and where big banking begins. I would submit to you, and my position from the perspective of a community banker is that in the larger banks, the branches are usually monoline. In other words, what they're devoted to is the presentation of retail banking services to the consumer. Whereas in the community banking model, the branch is usually the one, the only, the multiple channel deliverer of products, services, and image to the consumer. My personal definition, 50 billion and over, is more of a monoline presentation within the branching environment, but I'm sure we can all think of one or two exceptions to that rule. The point I want to make is when you put together 50 billion and over, you have a relatively small number of banks, less than 50, that control something close to 70% of the banking assets and probably 50%, roughly speaking, of the offices. But then when you turn to the rest of us, the under 10 billion, we're only 25% of the banking assets, we're 4,300 banks, we have 38% of the branches, and we are a very important part of the industry that behaves very differently in terms of how we use and develop branches than the large banks. I think of those of us in the community banking space, in other words, those of us in the red, as kind of the hobbits, if you think about it in the terms of Middle Earth, the hobbits of the banking industry. But I will remind you that the hobbits are the heroes of that story. And I think that is entirely appropriate. As we look at this, I think, again, going back to how I spent my undergraduate days, pictures are perhaps the best way to describe how different banks and different banking models use the branch, relying on the branch structure itself as a proxy for the argument. This is a very typical example of what I call a monoline branch, typically used by the larger institutions. It's about 2,500 square foot. It's one level. It's usually built in a high traffic shopping center area. It is designed for deposit gathering. Its lending floor is consumer, small business, commercial, usually executed through some sort of automated decisioning platform. The branch is efficient. It's relatively inexpensive to build. The investment in this particular branch, which was built in 2021, probably $1.5 million, plus or minus a little bit, and can also be repurchased. Repurposed. As one of my friends pointed out, this could always be renovated into a Starbucks if necessary. It's also a very successful model. It's maybe very different from how we do things as community bankers, but for its particular purpose, it is a very effective model. The final point that I would like to make, because as the research would indicate, the purpose of having a branch is not consistent across asset size. This branch, which actually is owned by Chase, was the branch in Montana which finished out Chase's strategy of a representation and having a flag in each of the lower 48. And so this bank is here for deposit gathering, but is also here to fulfill corporate goals of Chase's leadership. The other side of the world is this. This is a flagship Stockman bank. We have put institutions like this one 6 times into 6 different markets within the state of Montana. This building is not subtle. This building is very expensive. It actually represents 67,000 square feet of investment plus a parking garage. And it is viewed not only for the purpose of developing retail deposits and small business banking, but it also covers the entire range of services that we provide as a $7 billion community bank located in the state of Montana. Cash management, wealth management, our insurance subsidiary, our commercial real estate, our real estate development lending, and our treasury management for certain large customers are all handled through that facility. And what is different about our community banking model as compared to the large banks is that we provide similar services, but we anchor the people who support and provide those services in these branch structures. It's expensive. This is the passion of our CEO and his sister, who also own something over 90% of our company. So it's a corporate model that we are deeply invested in. Fortunately, by our definitions, it is successful. The Missoula market, and this was the flagship branch in the Missoula market, we entered the market in 2015. We've built three large locations in the Missoula market. They represent in total 145,000 square feet of space that is 70% utilized by the bank, our investment affiliate, and our insurance affiliate. So for the sake of my regulator who's in the audience, we're actually using our space as banking space. This is not a disguised commercial real estate investment play. But as you can see, as we grew into the downtown, the Brooks, and later the Reserve locations, we have managed to move our deposit volume in the Missoula market, which is a population of about 120,000 people, up over the $500 million mark in the course of about 10 years. And we've accomplished our goal of becoming the #3 deposit institution in the Missoula market behind 2 large legacy operations, and more importantly, to help pay for all the buildings, because the investment is significant. In our chosen lines of business, particularly commercial real estate lending and real estate development activities, we are at parity to or in a leadership position in lending in those markets, and that's an achievement that we are particularly proud of. The question, as we start to contrast these two models, is what do we have in common, and what do we have that's different? In common, both the large banks and the community banks are making an effort to deliver services to our customers through the branch environment. We're certainly using the branches in much the same way as a mechanism to develop stable and, more importantly, diverse deposit funding. The other thing that both of these buildings have in common is that they are only buildings. The quality of what we're able to deliver, our ability to deliver it, rests primarily on the people who are within the actual institutions. Without individuals in either of those two buildings who can answer customer questions and who can help customers solve problems, because the customer may have access to electronic banking, but my experience in the real world is when they have problems with anything that involves the bank, they're going to come to the branch building and look for the solution to their problems. And in order to provide that level of protection or that level of service to your customer, whether it's a large commercial client with a cash management follow-up, whether it's a small consumer with a credit card issue, you have to have people inside the building who can look them in the eye and guide them towards a solution. We see a similar issue, or I had a similar issue yesterday with the airline industry. To no one's great surprise, the airline schedule kind of went to heck, leaving me in Minneapolis. I was getting 5 different emails with 5 different departure times. Fortunately, because I had the status to be in the Delta Club, I wasn't reliant upon whatever was coming across my phone, but I could go to a specialist at the front of the Delta Club and say, okay, which of these emails really matter at this point in time? They didn't know, they were just as confused as I was. But more importantly, they could pick up the phone and not call customer service. Rather, they called Delta Dispatch downstairs somewhere at Minneapolis Airport and got the real answer as to where my plane was and what gate it was going to show up at and what time I had to have me and my carry-on at the gate. Extremely helpful information. Likewise, whichever model you're going to, and I would argue the advantage of the community bank model, particularly as we have implemented it within our use of the branch and why the branch is so central to us, is that inside that great building, there are people who have the experience and the contacts if a customer with a credit card problem walks into our office to either answer the question and help the customer or pick up the phone and call a colleague, perhaps at the main office, who they know and who they have a relationship with to help resolve the specific problem for the specific customer within the context of what the customer's problem is. When you move into the environment like the larger banks have, and which they probably have to where the branch is just a gatherer of retail deposits and its value is exclusively as a gatherer of retail deposits, all the branch representative can do is call the same 800 number, maybe with an expressed access number, but still the same 800 number call center to get an answer for the customer. The final point that I will make very quickly is to do that, you have to empower the people at your branch. They have to have the power to solve a problem. That creates all kinds of regulatory concerns, but it is inherent to the community banking business model, which has been, and hopefully will always remain, people helping people. And again, it's not so much about our buildings, although we're very proud of them, but it's more about the people that we put in the buildings and the empowering them with the ability to help their customers. So I hope this a little bit unconventional view of how we see our branches working is actually helpful to the discussion today. Thank you very much.